Oh, so Adriana, welcome to Super Lead Podcast.
Thanks, Maanda. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So, having read your profile, I am in awe. So I think let's dive in. But to start us off, maybe you could sort of kind of give us your journey to where you are today. And on this podcast, we prefer that you start as early as possible. We have all the time. We can sort of learn, where did you grow up and what are some of the pivotal moments, the ups and the downs to where you are as the founder of Proudly Human.
Thanks. Well, let's go back. My earliest memories actually have relevance. In fact, since I was around 4 or 5, growing up in Pietermaritzburg, so this is obviously before internet. We didn't watch much TV back then. I wasn't reading thick books at that age. So this was truly inspired that I imagined myself being part of a journey with humans to expand our society beyond Earth. So, it's quite a strange memory to have, and it's woven with me in and out of different parts that I've taken through my life. So I studied theoretical physics at UCT with the aim of becoming an astronaut. But then quickly became drawn into the quantum world. So on the one hand, I was driven by a grand vision to explore space, but on the other hand, my journey took me into the smallest pieces of reality, the atoms down into the electrons and the photons, the building blocks of reality. If you're going to start learning about life and the world that we find ourselves in, way better to start than with the smallest building blocks, right? So that took a few years. Okay. But then I found, let's say 10 years of hard labor in university. No, I'm a lover of knowledge. I'm a lover of learning. So this was really a beautiful time where you get to be a student, In those days, we feel like we overworked and underpaid, but later we look back at those days as, a joyful time in our life. So I was drawn back to space, in fact, from these building blocks, and did my PhD in quantum biology, looking at photosynthesis. So if you want to understand how these building blocks form living systems, you got to look to the simplest living systems first, and bacterial photosynthetic systems are the simplest ones, so the oldest. So if you follow my path of logic, you're going to move to space because you're going to say, are these simple photosynthetic systems capable of living in environments beyond Earth? You're going to say, do the building blocks required to build these living systems occur in space? If so, where? And how could they come about to join to form what we see as life on Earth? So one of the real lessons of studying life on Earth, and let's say we have not understood life, I wouldn't say at all, because there are a lot of biologists doing great work out there. But in my opinion, as a physicist, we have not yet understood biology in terms of how it emerges from physics and chemistry. There's a big disconnect there. The one thing we can say is that all known living systems on Earth need water. Not a single one, from the bacteria to the fungi to all the way to humans, can survive without H2O water in liquid form. Another thing we can say is that all life on Earth contains DNA. So these are kind of the starting points from which we can start to speculate about life beyond Earth. But if we really want to get serious, and stay with me now, the next step is to go and look for these things, because there's only so much theoretical modeling we can do. Eventually, we get impatient and we want to just go and look. So Mars used to contain liquid water on its surface. This is a great candidate place, also our next door neighbor, to start looking for evidence that these systems may once have lived there when there was liquid water. Perhaps they still prevail under the surface. And for me, discovering evidence of life on our next door neighbor planet would be the most profound discovery possible. And I really hope we achieve that during our lifetime.
Wow. So I think it was this week, my 4-year-old son said, "Hey, Daddy, let's go to space." I'm like, right. Good suggestion. So absolutely fantastic. You also had a corporate career. You were head of innovation at SAP. You want to tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of speaking in the academic forums, and then later in public, from ashrams to kindergartens to corporates. And so the team at SAP Africa thought it would be good to work together for a bit. So I've done my bit in corporate innovation, which has its own challenges, but was a great networking opportunity, traveling around the world, meeting like-minded innovators. Which enabled me to gather the collection of people who would volunteer for the project that I'm sure we'll talk about now, but also importantly, the technology partners that would build the technology for the kinds of projects we're thinking about, and a great network of advisors just to give advice on all aspects of the project. So yeah, I'm grateful to my colleagues at SAP and all the people I met along the way for helping me to create these teams.
Lovely. So now let's talk about Proudly Human. What is that about?
Yeah, so I mean, the way I framed it in terms of the search for knowledge and understanding who we are and what is life, that's like a luxury to be spending 10 years on answering those kinds of questions as a person living on the continent of Africa. Yeah. So one thing I think in particular for us on this continent have to acknowledge is that there's great inequality and the lack of access to the kinds of dreaming that we've just talked about now. Yeah. So a big challenge for me has been, how can I work towards both of these goals at the same time? The elimination of poverty is a necessary requirement for any kind of development. Sure. But can we as Africans look at eliminating poverty in conjunction with inspiring our youth that there's more to just dealing with food security, water security, but there's also space to dream about exploration and about new knowledge. And I think space for me just fits this like objective perfectly. Space has the power to inspire the dreamers of tomorrow, to inspire knowledge creation, exploration, curiosity, all of those great characteristics that we associate with being human. But on the other hand, if we think about a population of humans going to the moon, and that's imminent, the kinds of infrastructure that we're going to need to support that team is exactly the kind of infrastructure that we need increasingly for, 1 million refugees in Syria now, increasing numbers of people displaced in water scarce areas, in harsh environments. So my thinking and the thinking of the team at Proudly Human is that as we look to developing efficient power systems, reliable power systems, connectivity associated with this power system, communication networks, clean water, nutritious food, and developing all of these solutions in the smallest space with the least amount of resources possible to enable people to function normally as humans. These are the combined objectives of people living on Earth and people exploring beyond Earth. Shelter, power, water, food, and communication systems. These are the bedrock, the basic requirements for any human community, whether we're thinking about informal settlements or a crew of people going to Mars. The basic requirements are the same. And Proudly Human looks at these in a fun way, hopefully, with our off-world project.
So just kind of talk about the project so we kind of get almost can have a mental picture of what you're up to at Proudly Human.
Yeah, great. So I'll explain how the project will look exactly in a moment, but what the project tries to address, I think, for those of us living in South Africa, we know the shortcomings of having unreliable power, the trickle-down effect for water systems, for agricultural systems, for communication systems, for healthcare systems, education. Power is the most fundamental requirement, reliable power. But on the other hand, we also need to inspire next generations to be resource efficient. Our culture and our society nowadays encourages materialism. It encourages consumerism. And the danger here is that everybody's striving for something material and consumer-based, whereas we are a growing population on a finite planet, and we've got to start celebrating resource efficiency, not consumerism. So with that in mind, here's the fun part. We plan to take groups of 12 volunteers, experts in various fields, from medicine, obviously engineering, research, but also music, Karaoke nights will be great. Beer brewing, having a little on-site brewery won't go astray.
You must get some podcasters too.
Podcasters, we need mediators, we need communicators to communicate our message and also to facilitate communication within the group. Exercise, maybe a boxing instructor or get the tension out. So a diverse team of experts in various fields. We'll travel to remote areas on Earth, beginning with the Namib Desert. Live there for 40 days in an area with no infrastructure. So we're now going to the oldest desert on Earth, the Namib Desert, also one of the driest regions on Earth, to a place where there is rock, there's sand, there's air, very little humidity in the air, but there's sunlight. Okay, so these are the resources that we can access while we are in this place. And satellite communication systems, because we're not expecting any mobile data connection there. So then we'll build our shelter. We'll set up our power systems, whether that's wind combined with solar, combined with hydrogen fuel cells, combined with biofuel production. Redundancy, is Eskom listening? Redundancy in power generation is key for reliable grid facilities. You got to incorporate all these different ways of providing power so that if one goes down, you've got a backup system in place. Then we do water, so atmospheric water extraction. We do wastewater management on site. We grow food in a small contained space, indoor agriculture, precision agriculture. We modulate the environment where we grow the plants, because obviously it's like 40 degrees outside, too hot, too sandy for plants. So we need to provide an environment where we can grow sprouts, perhaps spirulina in tanks. There's a range of crops that we can try to produce in just 40 days. So there's the challenge there. Comms, I said, we'll have a satellite connection. We'll have wearables. Nowadays, you can get a patch that measures your cortisol levels. So we can do facial expression recognition during meetings. We can monitor your patch. Then we can ask you how you felt afterwards. And you can see how there's a very interesting data set from a social science perspective that we can generate from these 12 people who bravely volunteer all their personal data and their time during these 40 days in the desert. So in theory, any human can survive without food for 40 days, but we will bring, mealie pup or whatever local staple with us to supplement the leafy sprouts and things that we try to produce in the greenhouse. In theory, the 40 days should be survivable. But moreover, we hope to produce research and innovation from this project, but also encouraging young people to celebrate resource constraints, to celebrate wastewater management, to celebrate the fact that just like astronauts in the space station, we are regenerating water from our urine, for example. Puts people off, but this is the reality of a future of efficient water management. Then we go to Antarctica, then we live under the ocean. We'll be exploring a bunch of different places with a different technology set, but we want to showcase the kinds of technologies that already exist. I think particularly South Africans are wondering about power security, water security, even food security. We want to demonstrate what's possible from scratch with a team of people in a completely remote area without any existing infrastructure. And we want to inspire, young people to dream about traveling beyond Earth and the really important parallels that exist between eliminating poverty on Earth and exploring Earth beyond Earth.
Wow. So these projects, these off-grid habitation experiments in these extreme environments, I wonder what sort of some of the lessons you learn about human resilience and adaptability, which is what, all of us as leaders sort of need to have that resilience and be able to be adaptable, whatever comes our way.
Yeah, thank you. And I enjoy those words. Sustainability for me has always been a difficult one to understand because nothing is sustainable forever. As we know in physics, everything changes. Even the universe is not sustainable forever. So great. I know that resilience and adaptability, these are the tools that we need to face an uncertain future. So I think the most important thing for these experiments is that we're going to go in with an open mind. So one of the big questions that we need to reflect on now as a society is how do our governance systems and regulatory structures enable us to be adaptable and resilient for the future? Or moreover, do they actually enable us to become resilient and adaptable for the future, or do they hinder this? So we're coming in with an open mind. Let me not go too deep into my criticisms of the current economic system. We're coming with an open mind to this community, and we're going to watch in a data-driven process what kind of regulatory structures or governance systems this team of 12 decide on. So from the outset, there's no leader, there's no democracy, there's no communism, capitalism, there's nothing. There's just 12 people. So this is obviously a small group of people and only a limited amount of time. So it's not exactly a model for Earth, but in the long run, we hope to generate data on what kinds of, perhaps novel methods of organizing themselves these communities come up with to solve challenges. And I think through that, we will also have an important opportunity to reflect on human cultures that we may have, swept by the wayside through history, even going back to the Sand people, even going back to the Aboriginal people in Australia. These were peoples who survived for vast periods of time. You want to talk about sustainability, talk about surviving as a society for 100,000 years. Then it becomes something that as modern humans, I don't know if we'll necessarily attain that. But I think the most important learnings, and obviously there's limited information available on the cultural structures of these people, like between 200 and 100,000 years ago, it's difficult to say. But existing populations who've retained aspects of their culture do have a sense of egalitarianism. So there's not necessarily a leader within that group, and it's a small group. But there are perhaps groups of elders who would provide advice to the rest of the community, but no real specific leader in these egalitarian groups. Another important thing, and there's different ways to call it, but maybe the gift economy is one that makes sense to people. There was no sense of trade. There was a sense of if we hunt and make a kill, we obviously don't have means of refrigerating it. So we do run the 10 kilometers over the escarpment to drop it with the neighbors. Because why wouldn't we, otherwise it results in waste. And this kind of attitude of naturally giving when we have excess, I think is kind of completely absent from our current culture. And maybe these two things are important to reflect on if we really want to be sustainable, or importantly, if we want to be adaptable and resilient, we've got to share, and we've got to regard everybody as equal. I mean, these are basic fundamental requirements that perhaps our modern society has lost sight of in this rapidly changing era where everyone's chasing their tails and wondering what's going on.
Just accumulating. And then you, most of what you do, anchors itself on sort of this latest technology, one of which is blockchain. Do you want to sort of share how you're sort of leveraging blockchain in some of your work?
Yeah, so when we do go to Namibia, we would like to, as I've said, not have an existing regulatory or governance system in place. But what we understand in this modern context is that, knowledge of what's going on the ground is really critical. And another word of saying, data collection on both the past, the present, and in order to predict the future is increasingly critical. So a precursor for any successful governance model or regulatory system or economic system basically is an overview of resource availability. And I feel like this is desperately missing from our analysis of the future of the sub-Saharan region, where we will face increasing water shortages due to lack of rainfall, due to climate change, and how do we have insights into exactly how much fresh water we have to go around, exactly how we can fortify our requirements for future climate change. I just feel like data on the existing resource distribution is something we need to focus on. So how can we do that? What we would need to monitor resources, both existing resources we can extract, resources we can process and transform into other forms of resources, waste, which is a word we should do away with really, because outputs from some kind of resource processing should immediately form inputs for other kinds of resource processing. So for example, carbon dioxide that humans breathe out is useful to plants who enjoy high levels of carbon dioxide in the greenhouse, simple example. There should be no such thing as waste in a resource efficient society. So one way perhaps to keep track of resources is to outsource, can I say that, outsource government to artificial intelligence. At least to give the correct information. The decision making, I agree.
I see.
Needs to sit with the human. But in order to keep track of resource existence, transformation, and perhaps predictions about the future of resources, we need a ledger. We need an immutable ledger. We need a distributed ledger that's not controlled by any central authority, that is available, not tamperable, but available and transparent to all the people who are consuming those resources. And by this, I mean, you know, power, water, air, the basic resources as well. Perhaps blockchain gives us a technological tool to provide this distributed, immutable, decentralized kind of ledger, which can keep track of resources to enable us to make decisions. So I don't think we're at the point yet where we want to outsource decision making to machine learning algorithms. We still need humans for that. But in terms of keeping track of things, I think the machines that we've built are far better at doing that than us.
Lovely. And I imagine even at a more localized level for an organization, if you're not fully aware of where all your resources are going, you probably want to employ some of these technologies.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've seen the blockchain revolution kind of been usurped by capitalism, if I could say that. And now we talk about cryptocurrency almost synonymously with blockchain. But for me, you know, blockchain in its original proposal was, of course, for Bitcoin. But the applications of blockchain beyond just the currency, I feel, are the most powerful, have the most powerful potential to transform our society. It's not just another form of currency. It's a means of record keeping. And yes, we're obsessed with money in the current culture and we want to keep records about it. But if we keep infinitely detailed records about money and we run out of clean water and we are not able to breathe clean air, then tell me what is the point of keeping track of all the share price indices and whatever. What we really need to keep track of in detail are our resources. And in this way, I think this is an application of blockchain, including, you know, for identification. This is another important aspect. You know, having a form of ID is a basic entry-level requirement for banking, education, and everything else. So that's another application of the ledger that's immutable and decentralizes to identify humans, every human, no matter where in the solar system they are. Potentially they could be identified through some kind of blockchain ledger. So that's another application besides resource management. So I'm a fan of those applications of blockchain. Yeah, I'm not really an investor in crypto.
Oh, maybe not yet. So I'm curious about your experience as the member of the South African task team on the 4th Industrial Revolution. And I imagine that gives you a certain perspective on the intersection of policy and technology. What are some of your reflections from sort of that journey?
Well, it was great to be part of that panel with a lot of people smarter than me and a lot of the topics that we were discussing. So it was a DHET, Department of Higher Education and Training initiative. So already that tells you something interesting. We weren't looking at 4IR from a DTI or a DSI perspective, but from an education perspective. So for me, the most impactful takings from the report that we submitted to Minister Nzimande was that we don't have enough seats in South Africa to cater for the number of people who need training and upskilling if we are to become this technologically enabled society that can compete, you know, with other parts of the world. And we are not going to just settle for competing. As Africa, we want to become first in aspects of science and technology that's driving our society. You know, why not? Where's the vision, guys? Where's the vision? So how can we get to the forefront of developments in science and technology when we are still plagued by poverty and other challenges that we face here? And the answer was upskilling. And the answer in a nutshell was, you know, online learning. And I think the report was submitted in 2019. And it was unfortunate, I think, that there weren't the follow-ups that could have happened in that period of turmoil for government of 2020, right, when the lockdowns occurred. I think that would have been a really perfect opportunity to have taken these recommendations into account and really look at, which it is going on, a drive to putting more stuff online to enable people to patch together degrees. You know, maybe you're doing an internship at a virtual reality startup. You know, how can that count for credits towards some kind of degree that you want to complete? This is so the regulation around acknowledging or certifying different offerings from different startups through to traditional universities. How can we accredit these? How can we get a central accreditation system going so that people can piece together degrees that are maybe not the traditional, like UCT, BSc that I did, for example, many years ago. As well as an increasing move to online learning where we can house. I mean, we've got 60 million people around in the country. We've got hundreds of thousands of matrics graduating every year. So we really have tens of millions of people looking to upskill in some form of or another, maybe part-time. Tens of millions of people. So how do we create the opportunities for these people to be able to live? And I think that's a challenge throughout the developing world, which we can solve through technology, again, online learning and increased collaboration, I think,
And is there some momentum picking up in that front?
So we submitted the report and we await being called back to implement, but I'm sure people are working on it.
Okay. So I'm told you have a book coming up called Mission of World. Do you want to kind of just tell me a bit about it?
Yeah, so as I explained in the beginning, the first let's say 20 years of my career were in school and university learning. So this was almost a brain dump. I tried to make it interesting as possible, but basically a technical brain dump of everything I've had the privilege to learn in the past 20 years, hopefully with some tricks and some context of people I've met along the way and a bit of anecdotes here and there. But it was a long time in the coming, and I feel like now I'm a bit free to move on to thinking about other things because the book is there. The book is there in China, so if you are fluent in Mandarin, then you are free to get a copy later this year. We're still editing the English version, so watch this space.
So let's talk about it. Why was the first copy in Mandarin?
The Chinese, so they've got a national Chinese publishing agency. The National Chinese Publishing Agency. And before they'd even read the full draft, they were keen. So I think
and you can speak the language?
Oh hell no. I did live in Japan, so I can speak a bit of Japanese, but Mandarin, no. No, so I guess I will never know exactly what it says, but I trust the translator.
So what are some of the key themes we can expect from the book? I know it's in a collection of your learnings, maybe 2 or 3 heavy takeaways from the book.
So good, it's divided into 3 parts. So the first part is where do we come from? And then it's a history of what we know about the universe, or how little we actually know about the universe. You know, the majority of the universe is made up of what we call dark energy and dark matter. And that's just a way of obscuring the fact that we can't see the stuff, so we don't actually know what it is. So let's call it dark. 25% of the universe is stuff that we study. Physics, chemistry, biology. Okay, so there's a large part of it that we can't even study because we only infer the existence thereof. Anyway, where do we come from? Then who are we? So then I take a bit of a journey in the history of Homo sapiens, reflecting on ancient cultures all the way through to the exploration drive that's like driven us to prevail through our resilience and our adaptability through all sorts of catastrophes. You know, you think load shedding is bad, try a super volcano or a massive asteroid impact. There are many challenges that can occur. So let's hope that our training and the challenges we face now is going to be enough for whatever other challenges come the way of humans, because they have done throughout our history. You know, resilience and adaptability to massive, large-scale climate shifts is kind of what we do. So there's that, and then the final part is where are we going? So again, kind of look back at the history of exploration on Earth, the history of space exploration. And then some opinions about how exploring beyond Earth will, you know, evolve our thinking into a more advanced form such that we are able to solve the challenges that we face here on Earth. Because in our current state, I'm not convinced that we are advanced enough to solve the challenges that we have created. You know, Einstein supposedly said, you know, you can't solve the problems of today with the thinking that created them. And that's kind of what we're doing here, stuck on Earth. And that breath of fresh air, that overview, that perspective, that additional knowledge, that additional evolution that we will gain, not not necessarily through personally living on the moon, but just through knowing there are people permanently based there. You know, that leap of imagination and excitement that happens when the first crews arrive on Mars, you know, this alone evolve our perspective of our planet Earth, because now we can see just how difficult things are on another planet, our neighbor, and hopefully be grateful and respect the life, all of the biodiversity that makes life possible here on our planet, which as far as we can see doesn't exist anywhere else.
Sure. And then the project Africa to the Moon?
Oh yeah, very exciting. So we're going back to the moon, okay? Like I don't have much of a filter, so let me say I think it's an underwhelming marketing campaign by NASA to be going back to the moon with a person of color and a woman. If other people find that distasteful in any way, then you're not alone. But this is great. On the other hand, this is fantastic. Of course, we need to go back to the moon. We've already demonstrated that we can get there, but it's been so long that many people are not sure whether this actually happened or not. So let's get back to the moon. Let's establish more than a flag. Let's establish a research base. It's our moon, right? We should have been existing on our moon for as long as we could get there. So you know, the Earth moon system will always be one system. And so I don't think we're going to expect an economic revolution based on the research bases that we set up on the moon. Mars could be a different story. So what we're already seeing on the moon is commercialization. So NASA has already put a price tag on extracting water from the surface of the moon. Because basically, if you are a company looking at developing rovers and lunar mining capabilities, or whatever word we might use for the way that we extract stuff from the surface of the moon, if you can provide water cheaper than it is to launch from Earth, then you're in business, literally. So this is a driver of startups, larger companies, and national agencies to start looking towards how we can be sustainable on the moon. We can't be launching the 10 to 20 minimum liters of water a person needs to survive from Earth, never mind the agriculture we may want to set up. Importantly, also fuel. So H2O is a critical molecule for life, as I've said, but also sort of chemically. So the hydrogen in the H2O can be used for rocket fuel, which is burned in oxygen. Great, we can split them through electrolysis and burn the hydrogen in the oxygen for rocket refueling, for example, on the moon. The oxygen is breathable, etc. It's a useful molecule. The water is obviously useful. So that's sort of the NASA approach. We're going back to the moon to establish a permanent human presence, and we're going to extract resources in situ, including water, which is a fundamental one. We've got China collaborating with Russia on the other hand, and they plan to build a also permanent lunar base research station by 2028. Sorry, NASA's planning for 2025. I would bet money that they're going to postpone that by at least a year. So let's say towards the end of the 2020s, we would like to see people with NASA back on the moon and a fully fledged research base built by the Russians and the Chinese. They plan to send crew there perhaps in the 2030s. And they plan a fully nuclear powered base. So while the US is looking to fuel traditional rockets with the water that they extract there, China and Russia are going straight to nuclear. And that's a whole nother discussion, but I support that initiative. Nuclear power just provides like orders and orders of magnitude more power than a similar volume of, for example, hydrogen fuel.
Lovely, lovely. So as a researcher, innovator, and as you reflect back in your journey, maybe 2 or 3, if it were...
Wait, I didn't mention that. I didn't mention the Africa to Moon project. Got distracted.
Okay, go, get into it.
So as the world gets excited about going back to the moon, what role is Africa going to play? Because back during the Apollo mission, NASA built a station at Hartebees Hoek, the Hartebees Hoek Observatory, that could relay signals, because as the Earth and the Moon move relative to each other, they needed constant communications with the Apollo crews. And so there were stations built in Australia and South Africa to ensure continuous communications. So will Africa be contributing more than just relaying signals as the superpowers go back to the moon? And my very good friend and collaborator, soon to be Dr. Carla Sharp, founded the Foundation for Space Development a few years ago, and I've joined as a director, and her brainchild as the African Program Director for the SKA radio telescope is a radio telescope on the far side of the moon. So we are nearing completion of agreements to build these prototypes. We've designed them, we need to build them. We've already got agreements in place to test the components of the radio telescope in the International Space Station, also to deliver them to the near side of the moon with a private company. And we are in the process of applying with China to deliver the final radio telescope to the far side of the moon, probably in the next handful of years. So we're currently in the final stages of prototyping. We are dedicated to ensuring, for the sake of the next generation of dreamers, that Africa plays more of a role than just relaying signals in our return to the moon, in the form of, we're the home to the SKA radio telescope. And in the same spirit, Africa would like to extend its presence to the moon through technology, in terms of doing new science and putting Africa's first mission on the surface of the moon, and also inspiring the upcoming generations of young people in Africa that through collaboration, not necessarily through multi-billion-dollar budgets, but through collaboration, inspiration, and hard work, we can also go to the moon. And do
lovely. I love that a lot. So as we sort of move towards the conclusion, I'm keen, you've been leading in this just cutting edge spaces, research, innovating, and the space program that you talk about. What are some of the 2 or 3 sort of key leadership takeaways that you might want to share with our listeners?
Great. Well, I just gave a talk where I outline 3 aspects of off-world thinking, so that's convenient. So off-world thinking, the first, if you're doing your mission design, you've got to go back to basics.
Sure.
So especially when you're in an extreme environment that's unpredictable, you can't rely on legacy systems doing the same role that they did before. So when you're doing a mission design plan, whether you're doing a business proposal or literally designing a mission to the moon, start from scratch, go back to basics, ask all the simple questions, ask all the basic questions, forget everything you knew, be humble, basically. So humility comes with going back to basics, and that's critical to design a robust plan. Number 2, in situ resource utilization. So knowing your environment, basically, and this involves curiosity. So whether you are looking at starting a new production facility or literally putting up a power plant on Mars, you need to think about how your operations integrate within the existing environment. This could be the political environment, but I'm thinking more practically in terms of resources. Is there a facility nearby that has a waste output that you can repurpose as your own input? Are you able to recycle something that's someone nearby? Local environmental understanding. What's going on around you? How can you fit into existing processes? Be curious then. Find out what the people and the organizations around you are doing, how you can collaborate with them for existing alignments between your 2 goals, and how you can, support each other perhaps in other aspects. But importantly, I think if we focus there, it's on waste management. How can we use others' waste to create our products? And curiosity is required to really get that understanding. So humility, getting back to basics, curiosity, understanding your environment and using the resources that are around. And then number 3, I think, is understanding your team, your team. Because the people who are going to enable you to pull off this plan in this potentially hostile environment are going to be these people that support your project and assist you to get the vision to completion. And compassion is required for this. Understanding everyone's coming from their own perspectives in life, but how can we find unity in order to work together to achieve the purpose? So I think the characteristics that we need, whether we're going to Mars or battling it out here on Earth, humility, curiosity, and compassion. With those, we can go a long way.
Oh, that is stunning. So Adriana, we ask all our guests these last 2 questions. One is, if you want to give our listeners a challenge, after someone has listened to us, maybe one challenge, one thing they can go try do tomorrow. And the second one, we ask if you can recommend a book or 2, largely for me to add to my bookshelf, or, for our listeners to continue to read and learn in the same lines of our conversation.
Yes, so a challenge. let me say, here's a thought experiment. Maybe for some of you, it will turn out to be a real experiment, but imagine that you're volunteering to join a crew to go and establish a new community on Mars, not the moon, Mars, like the unknown. Your mother can't look at you through a telescope at night and wave like Mars, it's further away. So what would your project proposal be? That's the challenge.
Oh, wow.
What contribution would you make to a community living in an extreme environment? But then taking that back, we are already in an extreme environment. So whatever spontaneously comes to mind about what you would do on Mars, and as a scientist, a quantum physicist is pretty useless on Mars. So I've also had to dig deep to know, like, what are my personal, how am I useful to this project? So let's dive deep, think about how we can be useful to others and to the infrastructure that we need to build there. And then think about, is this aligned with what I am doing on Earth? You know, how much is my dream of doing something on Mars aligned with my current activities on Earth? And if you're doing a job that you hate, you know, but on Mars, you imagine yourself as the visionary, whatever, then can you do some work to bring these two closer together? So that's the challenge. Off-world thinking. Off-world thinking.
I love that experiment a lot. I think I'll take it on.
Please,
because then it just reframes how you kind of sort of do what you do today, right? By sort of imagining what you will contribute in this extreme environment, and then kind of, no, that's just beautiful, right?
And let's be honest, things on Earth are more extreme than Mars. Mars is extremely predictable compared to Earth. There's very little weather. There are no humans. There's no life. There's no climate change. There's no politics. There's no geopolitical stability. There's just Mars, right? So in that sense, life there will be fairly predictable. So let's remember that Earth is the most extreme place in the solar system right now. Maybe except for the sun. Okay, that wakes us up. That wakes us up quite a bit. So from me, challenge accepted. Perhaps a book or two. I see you have a lot of books already, so I'm going to be cheeky and recommend a TV series.
Okay, good.
Which I'm really loving right now. And if people want to get excited about our potential in space exploration, it's called For All Mankind. For All Mankind. It's an Apple TV series. It's now on season 3, which I haven't watched yet, but it starts off with the Soviets get to the moon first.
Yeah.
That's the first episode. I'm not giving any spoilers here. First opening scene is the Soviets get to the moon first.
Sure.
So the Americans are not going to give up now with the flag planting up now. The space race continues. So it's like a weird science fiction where it's historical science fiction. So the technology that we see them developing in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is all realistic. If we imagine that the space race continued instead of ending with a flag planting by the US and then it was all done with. So a fascinating series, which then streams off to Mars in season 3. A really interesting reflection on society and politics and how that plays into our budgets and our dreaming for space exploration. Cultural reflection as well. Very interesting series. I recommend it.
Oh, lovely, Adriana. This was absolutely amazing. Super insightful and inspirational as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Maanda. It was a real pleasure chatting with you.
Cool stuff. Stop recording.